Okay, let's dive in. Imagine this for a second. What if the US dollar, the foundation of global finance, actually started to wobble?
It sounds dramatic, doesn't it? But it's a serious conversation happening right now.
Yeah, you hear de-dollarization thrown around more and more.
And the stakes are incredibly high. For the US, well, a weaker dollar changes everything, its influence, its economy, and for the rest of the world. It could completely reshape, trade, finance, even power balances. Some analyses are genuinely asking if this is, the end of dollar dominance.
Right, so today we're not just looking back at how the dollar got here. We want to figure out what this all means for you, for your savings, your investments, the global economy you live in. That's our mission for this deep dive. So to understand where we might be going, we kind of have to look back first, right? How did the dollar get so powerful? I guess Bretton Woods is the place to start.
Absolutely. Bretton Woods back in 1944. That was the pivotal moment. It basically pegged other currencies to the dollar, and the dollar itself was pegged to gold.
And the U.S. was in a unique position then, after the war.
Exactly. It was the dominant industrial power left standing, really. So that system cemented the dollar as the world's main reserve currency.
Reserve currency, meaning what exactly, in practical terms?
It means it's the default, right? It's what central banks hold, what international trade is mostly priced in. It provides liquidity, trust. It underpins the whole global financial system.
And that gives the U.S. advantages. I've heard the term exorbitant privilege.
That's the classic phrase, yes. It's a huge advantage. It means the U.S. can finance its debts, its trade deficits, much more easily than other countries. It can borrow more cheaply.
So like an economic superpower.
In a way, yeah. It also allows the U.S. to use financial leverage, sanctions and such, as a foreign policy tool. That's a power no one else really has on that scale.
It wasn't always the dollar, though, was it? Other currencies used to dominate.
Oh, absolutely. Think the British pound before it. But the dollar's rise after World War II was pretty decisive, a major shift.
Okay, so that's the history, the foundation. But you mentioned cracks appearing. Where are the stress points now? What's putting pressure on this dominance?
Well, there are several things converging. One big one is concern about U.S. fiscal stability. The national debt, the persistent trade deficits.
How is the reserve status linked to the trade deficit?
It's a complex loop. Because the dollar is in such high demand globally, it tends to stay strong. A strong dollar makes U.S. exports more expensive and imports cheaper, which contributes to that trade deficit.
I see. And we've seen reports about the dollar weakening recently.
Yes, there have been periods, sometimes quite sharp ones, where the dollar has declined significantly. Some economists have pointed to, concerning trends, calling certain periods its worst start in decades. That adds to the nervousness.
And it's not just economics, is it? Politics seems to be playing a bigger role.
Hugely. Political unpredictability is a major factor. You hear rhetoric, sometimes reported from political leaders, maybe suggesting certain countries or blocs like BRICS are actively trying to undermine the dollar.
Like the reports about former President Trump warning about BRICS and tariffs.
Exactly. Now, we're just reporting what's been said, not taking sides. But that kind of talk definitely feeds into the narrative. It raises the perceived political risk of depending only on the dollar.
Which brings us to this idea of weaponization. That sounds serious.
It is. It refers to using the dollar system, especially access to it, for geopolitical aims, primarily through financial sanctions.
Cutting countries or companies off from the dollar system.
Precisely. Leveraging the dollar's central role to exert pressure. And the U.S. has used sanctions much more frequently in recent years.
Does it work? I mean, do sanctions achieve their goals?
That's a really debated question. They can certainly inflict economic pain, but there's a growing argument that their overuse has, backfired in a way.
How so?
By pushing countries harder to find ways around the dollar. It accelerates the search for alternatives precisely because nations want to reduce their vulnerability to these sanctions.
So the very tool meant to enforce the dollar's power might be weakening it long term.
That's the unintended consequence many analysts point to. We're seeing evidence like in trade invoicing big commodity deals like oil being done in yuan or other currencies, specifically bypassing the dollar. It signals a shift.
Okay, so if countries are actively looking for ways out, what are these alternatives? What's actually gaining traction?
Well, first, you see a slow but steady shift in central bank reserves. They're holding slightly less dollar percentage-wise, diversifying into other assets.
Like gold.
Gold is a big one, yes. Central banks have been buying gold at record rates recently. It's that traditional safe haven. seen as insulated from any single currency's issues.
And what about groups like BRICS? You mentioned them earlier.
Right, the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and now others are actively discussing ways to trade more amongst themselves using their own currencies. There's talk of things like a BRICS currency settlement system or BRICS Pay.
Still early days for that, though.
Definitely, lots of challenges, but the intent is clear: reduce dollar dependence.
And China's role in this, with the yuan.
China is absolutely central. They're pushing the yuan, especially for trade, like in oil deals, the petro-yuan concept. And then there's the digital yuan, the ECNY.
Central bank digital currency.
Exactly. China sees that as a potential way to internationalize the yuan and perhaps bypass existing financial plumbing, which is very dollar-centric.
Speaking of plumbing, what about SWIFT? The messaging system for international bank transfers. Are there alternatives emerging there too?
Yes, that's crucial infrastructure. China has developed CIPS, the cross-border interbank payment system. It's designed specifically for yuan transactions and offers an alternative to SWIFT, giving China more control.
So CIPS isn't just messaging like SWIFT, it actually handles the settlement.
Correct. It's a more complete system for yuan flows, potentially offering a parallel track. There are other regional systems too, and even talk about linking various systems together.
And digital currency is beyond the ECNY, like stablecoins.
Stablecoins are definitely trending. They offer potential speed and cost advantages for cross-border payments, but there are significant risks.
Oh, just.
Well, questions about what actually backs them. Are the reserves truly there and liquid? And the regulatory landscape is still really fragmented globally. A major stablecoin failure could cause, ripples. They're not without friction.
Okay, so we have historical dominance, current pressures, rising alternatives. Let's bring it down to earth. What does this actually mean for different countries and for people listening?
Okay, for the United States, if the dollar's role diminishes significantly, it could mean less global influence. That exorbitant privilege shrinks. Financing its debt could become more expensive.
And potentially higher inflation at home.
Potentially, yes. If demand for dollars falls globally, its value could drop, making imports more expensive. That impacts everyday costs for Americans, gas, groceries, everything.
And for other countries, especially emerging economies.
It's a double-edged sword, really. On one hand, less reliance on the dollar could mean more economic independence, less vulnerability to U.S. sanctions, more freedom to trade how they want.
Sounds like a positive.
It could be, but on the other hand, they'd be moving towards systems that are less tested, maybe less liquid, potentially riskier than the dollar system they're used to. There are challenges in building that trust in infrastructure.
Which leads to the ultimate question. Is the dollar going to collapse? Is that what we're talking about?
That's the headline, isn't it? Look, a sudden, complete collapse seems very unlikely.
Why not?
Inertia, mostly. The dollar is just so deeply embedded in everything. Global trade, debt, reserves. Trillions of dollars in contracts and assets are denominated in dollars. Untangling that isn't quick or easy. There's immense trust built up over decades, even with the current issues.
And is there a clear successor ready to take over?
Not really, no. That's the other major point. The euro has its own challenges, the yuan. China still has capital controls, transparency concerns. Many central banks are hesitant to go all in on the yuan as their primary reserve.
So it's less about a collapse and more about a shift.
Exactly. Think multipolar currency system. Not one dominant currency, but maybe several major ones playing significant roles regionally or globally. The dollar might still be the most important, but perhaps less uniquely dominant than it has been.
Of a rebalancing act.
Precisely. Diversification is happening. Countries are seeking more influence. The international system is evolving. It's gradual. More evolution than revolution, you could say.
Okay, let's try and wrap this up for everyone listening. The takeaway seems to be, the dollar faces real challenges. Real competition is emerging, partly driven by its own weaponization. But
a full-blown, imminent collapse isn't the most probable scenario. The dollar's deep roots and the lack of a clear, ready successor provide a lot of stability, even amidst these shifts. It's more likely a slow erosion or a move towards a more balanced, multipolar world.
So looking ahead, say the next 3 to 5 years, what should we be watching? What are the key signals?
Definitely watch the adoption rate of those alternative payment systems like CIPS or maybe even BRICS Pay if it gets off the ground. Keep an eye on central bank reserve allocations. Are they continuing to diversify away from the dollar?
And geopolitics, I assume.
Absolutely. Major geopolitical events, trade wars, sanctions decisions, these can accelerate or decelerate the trends. And watch commodity pricing, particularly oil. Are more deals being done outside the dollar? That's a significant indicator. Also, domestic policies in the US and China regarding debt, deficits, and currency management will be crucial.
Fascinating. It really makes you think, how will all these gradual shifts eventually change global trade? Maybe your own investments, and just the overall balance of power. Lots to consider there. Well, this has been a deep dive into a really complex but vital topic. We hope we've helped cut through some of the noise for you. So what do you think? Is this the beginning of the end for the dollar's reign, or just a new chapter in a more complicated world? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And for sharp weekly insights on global shifts like this, check out Venture Sages. And of course, make sure you subscribe here for more deep dives into the topics shaping our world.